Hi, my name is Irna, and I will be talking about the Second Crusade. The Second Crusade took place from 1147 to 1149. It was the second major crusade launched from Europe. Pope Eugene III called for this crusade in response to the fall of the County of Edessa in 1144. The crusade was led by King Louis VII of France and King Conrad III of Germany, along with other nobles in Europe. Even though Edessa was their primary goal, when the remnants of the European forces made it to Jerusalem in 1148, they decided to attack Damascus instead. They were eventually forced to retreat, and their efforts in the Holy Land were unsuccessful. The Crusader efforts did, however, conquer several territories in Iberia, including Lisbon, and in the Baltics. The fall of Edessa was the original reason for the start of the Second Crusade. The First Crusade and Minor Crusade of 1101 established three Crusader states: the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Edessa. The County of Tripoli was also established in 1109. Edessa was an important center for trade and culture and had been held by Christian kingdoms since the First Minor Crusade for a short period of time. However, it was also the weakest and least populated of these states, and so suffered many attacks from the surrounding Muslim states. Over time, it was frequently attacked, and slow parts were bought or taken over, and in 1144, Edessa completely fell to the Muslim Seljuk Turks. The fall of Edessa was communicated back to Europe by 1145, and was reported to Pope Eugene III, who issued a crusade bull on December 1st, 1145, initiating the Second Crusade. The response to the Crusade Bull was poor at first, and it even had to be reissued when King Louis VII of France first decided to take part. The Second Crusade was meant to be more organized and controlled than the first, as it was to be led by Europe's strongest kings and have a strong planned route. However, many parts of this Crusade's failure can actually be attributed to its poor planning and execution. The French abbot Bernard of Clairvaux was an important player in preaching and gathering the people for this crusade. He preached the Second Crusade, including granting indulgences for the people who joined, just like during the First Crusade. The indulgences are a form of a way of being forgiven or gaining salvation. They are a reduction of punishment for a person's sins when they go to heaven in the Catholic Church. The religious and secular leaders also promised protections for the Crusaders' families and their property. So many simple pilgrims responded to the call to join the Crusades because of these protections and the promise of salvation or redemption. The three main objectives of this crusade were restoring Edessa, fighting Muslims in Spain, and fighting pagan Wends at the Baltic Sea. There are roughly 60,000 European crusaders who fought in the Second Crusade, consisting mostly of a German contingent and a French contingent. The German contingent included 20,000 knights led by King Conrad III. These knights preferred to fight on foot and excelled with the sword. The French contingent included 700 king's knights and smaller number of knights raised by the nobility. The French contingent was led by King Louis VII, and they were better on horseback since they had good organization, strong use of the spear, and good speed on their horseback. There were also about 950 knights and 6,000 infantrymen from the Kingdom of Jerusalem. England did not fight in the Second Crusade because of internal factors and conflicts. The Muslim states had professional soldiers, typically ethnically Turks, who were very well trained and well equipped. The military system was a system of fiefs, which included a certain number of troops per district, and during wartime, the chiefs of Adath militias increased the number of troops. Adath militias were less trained than the professional Turk troops, but they were all very motivated by religion. The Germans were supposed to meet the French in Constantinople, but battles along the way and poor relations in the Eastern Roman Empire and the other countries they passed through caused King Conrad to decide to push on without waiting for the French. In Anatolia, the German contingent split into two divisions. Conrad did not listen to the Byzantine Emperor Manuel, who had told them to take the coastal route, so one group went overland with Conrad and the best troops, and the rest took the recommended coastal road. The Seljuks almost completely defeated the army of King Conrad on October 25th, 1147. They used Turkish battle tactics, including pretending to retreat and then going back to attack the German cavalry which followed them. Conrad was forced to slowly retreat to Constantinople and was even injured in battle by the Turks. The southern division of the German force was also defeated in 1148 after running out of food and being ambushed by the Seljuks. King Louis followed the same route as Conrad, with fewer conflicts, but they did also have poor relations in Byzantine territory. At Lapodian, Conrad joined with Louis's forces and they moved toward Ephesus. They then continued to be attacked by Seljuk Turkish archers along the route. The army was eventually almost completely destroyed by the Turks or illness. When the remnants of the Crusader forces made it to Jerusalem, Louis chose to finish his pilgrimage to Jerusalem rather than focus on the military aspect of regaining Edessa. In Jerusalem, the European troops were welcomed, and the Christian kingdoms held the Council of Palmyra. The High Court of Jerusalem met with the Crusaders, and they decided to attack the city of Damascus. They chose to attack Damascus because its loyalty was no longer certain, and they really needed to have a success. However, historians see this as a very foolish choice. On their way to Damascus, the Crusaders were constantly attacked by the Muslim army. And once they made it and laid siege to the city, the kings eventually had to abandon the city after finding themselves in a less defensible position. Conquering the Iberian Peninsula was one of the secondary goals of the Second Crusade. The Reconquista in Iberia started in the spring of 1147 when the Pope expanded the Second Crusade to include the Iberian Peninsula. Some crusaders from England stopped on the Portuguese coast on their way to the Levant, where they met with the Portugal king and agreed to help him attack Lisbon. In the 1147 siege of Lisbon lasted from July 1st to October 25th, when rulers of the city had to surrender due to hunger. This was described as a textbook siege. Most of the English crusaders then stayed and settled in Lisbon, while some continued to the Holy Land. Other crusaders on the peninsula later led attacks against Almeria, Valencia, Murcia, and Tortosa. The Northern Crusades, initiated by the Saxons and also the German and Danish nobles, took place in the Baltic and targeted pagan groups in these areas which bordered German territory. The Northern Crusades was also part of the secondary goal of the Second Crusade and was added by Bernard of Clairvaux and Pope Eugenius, since many Germans preferred to deal with warfare and fighting close to home before heading to the Holy Land. The Pope also issued a statement of intolerance, claiming that no truce should be reached with these tribes. They should either be converted or eliminated. Unlike in the Holy Land, the Northern Crusades were not focused on conquering land and taking it back into Christian hands from Muslim kingdoms, but was focused on converting the people in these areas to Christianity. This religious motive was, however, mostly just an excuse to gain more land and material wealth. This is one area in which the ulterior motives of the Crusades is very evident, as they were simply seeking material wealth. The Crusades continued in the Baltic for centuries after this, with an almost non-stop campaign until the 15th century. This failed siege in the Holy Land against and failure to recapture the county of Edessa or Damascus led to a lack of trust between the European kingdoms and led to the ruin of Christian kingdoms in the Holy Land. The crusade was, however, successful in some of their secondary goals in the west and conquered Lisbon, the future capital of Portugal. The relationships between the Eastern Roman Empire and the French kingdom were hurt by the Crusades, since many French leaders and the French population accused the emperor of helping the Turks. In the Eastern Roman Empire, people remembered the Crusade as a way that Emperor Emmanuel helped to create peace because he was working their enemies, the Europeans and the Turkish tribes and Muslim city-states, against each other. The Second Crusade also had long-term consequences in Jerusalem, creating conflict among the cities and the future of rebellions. In France, King Louis was seen as a suffering pilgrim king and generally was seen in a good way compared to King Conrad. And after the failed crusade, Bernard of Clairvaux tried to disassociate himself from the Second Crusade. He turned from supporting it to starting to preach on the sinfulness of Europe, claiming that Christian men and women in Europe had to become pure and prayerful in order for their knights to gain victory. This ideology became very important to the culture of crusaders and the culture of religion in Europe during the Middle Ages. Thank you.